So it's come down to this. I'm gonna pit these two consoles against each other in 9 categories and see which one ends up winning based on my preferences. Now, my personal history with these consoles was I was always a Nintendo guy. My state's government already knows that. But in 2011, I had enough of being the only guy in school who didn't have something that couldn't play Barrel Blast. So I had to decide, did I want an Xbox 360 or a PlayStation 3? Both had U-Star 2, so it really didn't matter. I ended up going with the Xbox 360, but always wondered if things would be different on the other side. I finally bit the bullet 5 years later and bought a used red PlayStation 3. I've barely used this thing. But this is the perfect opportunity to play this for the first time and play this to bring back memories and see which one comes out on top. Both of these systems have had 3 different designs released throughout their lives, and the first iterations are both absolutely iconic. This system looks like a fun box. This system looks like a space heater. I don't think the original PS3 looks bad by any means, but it looks like it's trying its hardest to look futuristic and expensive, and just ended up looking like it really wanted to be taken seriously and instead got called a fucking grill. Both of these are pretty beefy consoles. I mean, I'd be worried if I swallowed one. I do think the original Xbox 360 had more of a personality though. You could swap out the faceplates. I think every company tries this at least once and then never again, but this was a neat little idea. At least the PS3's PlayStation logo could be rotated based on its orientation. Yeah, we need new models. The slim variants of both systems. Now, I will say both of these were desperately needed. The PS3 needed a more cost-effective and attractive model, and the 360 needed a model that actually worked. Definitely, the 360S was the most necessary revision, with the original being plagued by the red ring of death, no Wi-Fi built in, no HDMI built in, yeah, this was definitely needed. But the least expensive model only had 4 gigabytes of storage. Oh, that's worthless. Now, to be fair, around 2007, Microsoft released the Xbox 360 Elite with HDMI built in. Still the original design, I'm worried this is going to catch on fire and I don't even own one. The PS3 Slim, while it was a bit of a stripped down version in comparison to the original, it was an excellent upgrade in terms of aesthetics. This system looks so good and still retains a lot of the character of the original model. Of course, you can always go cheaper, so Sony released the PS3 Super Slim, please go back. So this is kinda cute, look at this, it's like a bathroom stall. The disc tray is a bit problematic on here. It's not terrible, but it's so much cheaper, it's so much louder. Half the time when I open it, pop a disc in and shut it, it doesn't shut all the way and I have to nudge it slightly to get it to close properly. And this one started at 12 gigabytes of storage. Oh, yes! Now this was obviously made to be a super cheap entry-level PS3. It's nowhere near as sturdy or substantial feeling as the Slim or the original. I can't say this is a bad option to have. It's still a PS3. It's fine. I like that they tried something different and stupid, but it is undoubtedly the cheapest feeling one. It just doesn't feel like it matters. Well, Microsoft decided to can play at shitty third consoles and came up with this during sleep paralysis. The Xbox 360E. This is one of my least favorite looking consoles of all time. This released the same year as the Xbox One, so they decided to redesign the 360 to look more like the Xbox One, and who doesn't want to look more like the original Xbox One? The 360 has had a great look. I liked how sleek it was, how it was subtly X-shaped. That was great. So why do this? It just looks confused and scared. So both consoles had ups and downs with their designs, but if I had to choose one, I'd say the PS3 was the most consistently solid. I don't hate any of these designs. The Super Slim is totally cheap and the original is totally fat, but I think they all look at the very least fine. I really do like that original 360 design, but it didn't have Wi-Fi, HDMI, it was on its deathbed as soon as you bought it. It had problems, and while the S was a great upgrade to reliability, features, and overall design, the E just completely ruined the 360's chance here. The controller is what makes video games a thumb man's game. The Xbox 360 is often cited as having one of the best controllers of all time. It just feels so substantial. The button placement, the sticks, triggers, everything feels perfect. Of course, it does have some issues. The D-pad is on a similar level to Vlad the Impaler. They updated it later on to be a transforming D-pad, swing it around to be actively okay. It uses AA batteries for power, which was a bit outdated even for the time. Microsoft would later release play and charge kits though, which allowed you to simply use a rechargeable battery. You had to pay extra for it, but at least you had the option. But overall, this is still easily one of the greatest controllers out there. Now on a completely unrelated note, the PlayStation 3 controller. So it initially released as the 6-axis, which had no rumble. That got updated to the DualShock 3, which was everything the 6-axis was, but with rumble. I was waiting to be confused today. But all PS3 controllers basically look the same, which means they all look the same as PS2 controllers, which look the same as PS1 controllers, which were basically the same as a Super Nintendo controller. Sony used the exact same controller design for 3 consoles at this point. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, sure, but they kept cramming these modern technologies into a decade-old design, and because of that, it was easy to see some cracks forming. It's a bit small for my liking. I was never the biggest fan of the thumbstick placements. They added analog triggers, but the way they're designed make it easy for your fingers to slip off of them. There's also not as much weight to this controller as the 360's, which makes this feel a lot flimsier and more fragile. Just holding it, you can feel how easy it would be to snap this in two. With the 360 controller, I don't feel it at all. Now, the controller is rechargeable out of the box, which is a nice feature. However, while the battery life is pretty alright, the 360 controller with AA's lasted quite a bit longer. Now, PS3 does have motion controls. You can tilt the controller around, but my holy god is it gimmicky. I find it funny how people considered the Wii gimmicky back then, and justifiably so. But the PS3 controller had motion controls as well, and every implementation I've seen of motion controls with this controller were some of the most unnecessary garbage of all time. At least the Wii had bowling going for it. Now, the PS3 controller does look pretty classy. It looks more elegant. If a 360 controller's on your couch, I immediately think you cheat on your girlfriend and your fingernails look disgusting. This has more class. But it's still better in nearly every way to me. Better layout, better feel, better battery life, no unnecessary gimmicks, a few little issues, but this is pretty damn near close to perfect. The PS3 controller isn't bad, but it's just not as rock solid as the competition. The Xbox 360 had so many accessories. A way to play HD movies, a Wi-Fi adapter. Did the PS3 have those? Oh. The PlayStation 3 was the ultimate package. You could play Blu-rays right out of the box, use HDMI, connect to Wi-Fi, play PS1 games, PS2 games, everything! As long as you had the best models. So some of these features, namely Wi-Fi connectivity and PS2 game support, were taken out of lower-end PS3s originally to make them as cheap as possible. That does make buying these older models a bit more confusing, as most people don't really know how to differentiate a PS2 compatible Wi-Fi enabled PS3 in the wild. That's why it's easier to compare the features of the second revisions of each console onwards, and easily the PS3 still has the most features. Of course, Blu-ray support out of the box. Now, the Xbox 360 had an adapter to play HD DVDs, you're welcome humanity, but the fact you had to buy a separate disc drive for a soon-to-be obsolete format at the time, it just didn't stack up to the PS3. That was one of the biggest draws for the system, the Blu-ray support. It was the only system to have it at the time, and it was a great feature. Of course, you had the Xbox Live Vision camera, which was just a garbage webcam, you can't forget that. PS3 had the PlayStation Eye, but both of these evolved into the major accessories for the console, the Kinect and PlayStation Move. The Kinect was a camera that could sense your whole body. You could control the games with no controller. The PlayStation Move used the PlayStation Eye to read wands. And the Kinect automatically had more marketing potential and definitely did better right out the gate. The Move was a fine accessory, but it more so felt like a way to let the PS3 play Wii-type games. The Kinect, as terrible as it could be, allowed for much more possibilities with games not playable with standard controllers. But at least the PlayStation Move didn't take its company and obliterate it for 4 years straight. Kinect forced Microsoft into a casual entertainment perspective and made them lack ambition in the gaming landscape. The PlayStation Move, while it wasn't as exciting at the time, it was used in less offensive ways. It was often just an option and it worked well for the most part. It was a side thing for Sony rather than their core focus, but Kinect had more games for it that I think justified a purchase. Like, why would you buy a PlayStation Move to make people leave your house? There just wasn't a ton of compelling software for it. Now, Kinect had a ton more absolute garbage, but it at least justified itself with some titles, plus the idea was more novel than PlayStation Move. With that said, I think all the features packed into the PlayStation 3, plus its motion controller being non-obtrusive and fine, I think I'll give the features and accessories point to PS3. Kinect had more purpose, but it was bogged down with imprecise controls, terrible games, and overall tanking Microsoft's image in the latter half of the 360's life. Games like Kinect Sports and Dance Central may have been decent enough to warrant a purchase and were more iconic than the entirety of games that required PlayStation Move, but they just aren't a big enough deal to really make me vastly prefer the Kinect to the Move. I could go with one or the other most of the time, but with the PS3's suite of features, I think it takes this round. Which of these systems is the easiest to use while not compromising on options? Well, the 360's user interface has changed 3 times throughout the years, each one having their own fans until landing on this one. Honestly, I never had much of a problem with this interface. It's quick and snappy, everything is laid out in an understandable fashion, it makes sense. I don't think I've had to look up where certain things are on Google or anything. A few more advertisements than I'd prefer, but hey, this works quite well. The PS3 has had the cross-media bar since launch. It's updated a bit, but it's generally been the same vibe throughout the years. I do like this. I think it's well thought out and makes sense. You have all the general things you can do on the left and right, and then up and down are the options within the option you've selected. Though I do think that this interface is a bit bland compared to all of the 360's, and it does have a bit too many options. If we go to settings, it's really difficult to tell which setting is the specific setting you want to use. It's great if you really want to get down and dirty with your PS3, but if I want to adjust something, half the time I don't know which option to pick. I definitely have to Google how to adjust things every time, but hey, at least we have tons of things to mess around with. but holy shit, do I hate using this thing. The PS3 is a temperamental child. There's always something going on with it. Of course, the infamous updates. Pretty much every time I boot a game up, there's an update. There's something I have to install. Of course, most of the time I can't do anything in the background. I have to sit and watch this thing load. And this thing freezes up so much more than the 360. Installing, loading, updates. I'm always at the edge of my seat when the PS3 is doing any of this because there's a solid chance something's gonna go wrong. The Xbox 360 is simpler and just works most of the time. I pop in a game, if it has to update, it downloads it pretty fast. Barely any games have to install stuff. Its user interface is simple, but gives me the options I want. The PS3 is in the top 40 worst PlayStation consoles, but on a more positive note, it's in the top 40 best. Online play was incredibly important during this generation. I should know, I barely used it. But both of these systems did lean heavily into the online multiplayer crowd. If you were buying one of these systems, you gave a shit. Xbox 360 was generally considered the king of online multiplayer. Connection was great, the interface for setting up parties and hopping into games was simple and intuitive, good stuff. PS3 wasn't bad, but wasn't as elegant and wasn't nearly as feature-packed as the 360 was in its early years. It took a while, but the PS3 eventually got everything together and was pretty competent. But there was one big point against Xbox Live. You had to pay for it. No, that's not fair. I have a mouth to feed. Xbox Live Gold was $60 a year. Now, per year, that's not too bad. That's pretty reasonable. But if you wanted a slightly spottier service for free a year, you could buy a PS3 and spend that $60 you would have spent on online multiplayer on a new video game. Instead, you could have paid for surgery. Now, Sony did offer a paid online service, PlayStation Plus. This service gave you the ability to play betas for upcoming games, gave you exclusive sale prices for games, and updates could be downloaded to your console automatically instead of having to sit through it every time. You had to pay for that? The biggest deal was that you would get free games every month downloaded to your system for as long as you kept your Plus membership. Xbox would later offer monthly free games for Xbox Live Gold members in 2013, right before their next console would come out. Great. PlayStation Plus was kinda cool, but they lacked some weird features behind a premium paywall. But just to watch something like Netflix on the Xbox 360, something you already had to pay for monthly, you needed a gold subscription. That's dumb. But if I had to choose between the two, the 360 did have the better online component. Both did some dumb things, but we're also used to paying for online multiplayer now that it's not that big of a deal. Generally speaking, which console looked the best? Well, most people probably know the PlayStation 3 was more powerful than the Xbox 360. Yes, most people. Ask Ed Asner, he'd know. But when you compare the two, they are pretty on par with each other. While many PS3 exclusives looked phenomenal at the time, 360 games didn't look that much worse. In fact, because the 360 had a bigger install base for most of its life and was easier to develop for, most third-party games ended up looking better on 360 because they were made with that hardware in mind. Now, this isn't a huge deal. By better, I really mean we're splitting hairs here, but 360 does look slightly nicer. Playing something like BioShock Infinite on the PS3, I do notice a lot more dirty-looking textures compared to the 360 version. Third-party games look and run a bit better on 360 most of the time. And while there are a handful of cases where the PS3 version of a game is drastically worse than the 360 one, most of the time, it's not that noticeable. Playing the PS3 version isn't much different at all from the 360 one. But the developers working exclusively with the PS3, the developers who actually took the time to figure out how to use the system to the best of its abilities, my god, some of these games look just as good as PlayStation 4 titles. Just comparing two exclusives for each system that released in 2011, Gears of War 3 and Uncharted 3, Uncharted does look better to me. But the 360 can do some really impressive stuff, like really impressive. Just like in Rise of the Tomb Raider on the system from 2015. This was an Xbox One game, but the 360 version looks incredible for the console. And it doesn't even require an install or multiple discs. The Xbox 360 can put out some crazy graphics, but the PlayStation 3 at its best will always look a little bit better to me. God, I hope my new video game console can play my older games even though I'll never play them. Backwards compatibility is such a luxury to have even if you barely use it. And the PlayStation 3 initially was set to be the ultimate PlayStation. It could play all generations. And then the PS2 support was taken out of the cheaper models to cut costs. And then they got rid of it entirely. But hey, the Xbox 360 can play original Xbox games. This is the ultimate pleasure. Could you imagine a worse note to get on your windshield? So both consoles have trouble with playing older games. All PS3s play PS1 discs, but a specific version of the original model is the only one that can play PS2 games. Some PS1 and PS2 games are available to download from the PlayStation Network store, and various PS2 games were re-released in high definition via collections, so regardless, you had some options on PS3. The Xbox 360 can play a little less than half of the original Xbox library. Microsoft would update the 360 every now and then, offering more and more original Xbox games that were supported until they just gave up. Even though most of the major Xbox releases you'd care to play are supported, many of them have issues. The Wikipedia list of the Xbox games that were backwards compatible has a specific column denoting issues, so that says it all right there. However, most games run fine enough. Many older titles were re-released via downloads on Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network, and while Xbox Live Arcade was easily the more popular of the two, most legacy titles appeared on both services. These two both have their problems with playing legacy content, but the PS3 had the most options and always supported PS1 discs. I already talked about how third-party multi-platform games generally looked and ran better on Xbox 360, and yeah, that's generally the case. Sometimes third-party games have to install trash on PS3, but they just immediately boot on the 360. Like, come on. Most of the time, the graphical differences are incredibly minor. It's to the point where I'd say, if you're playing a third-party game on PS3, you don't have much to worry about. Is not a big deal. But to combat any graphical differences, many third-party PS3 games offer exclusive content, whether that's exclusive characters in fighting games, exclusive missions and modes, PlayStation Move support, that's all pretty cool. Xbox 360 versions really didn't have much to offer in comparison. I mean, Call of Duty DLC came to Xbox first. Oh jeez, I better get Black Ops 2 in 2020. But most of the time, PS3 offered legitimate gameplay reasons to want to own that version instead of the 360 one. Even having PlayStation Move support in BioShock Infinite, that's way cooler than offering Kinect support in Mass Effect 3, where it's literally just screeching at your Xbox to make choices on screen. And some people like playing shooters with motion controls. It was a cooler incentive than noise complaints. However, a lot of these exclusive features didn't amount to a lot. They were cool incentives, but to be honest, most third-party games were made for Xbox 360, and thus, they just work better on the platform. Most major third-party games came to each console. You weren't missing out on much if you were a big THQ nut and you owned a 360. What this all boils down to is, which console had the best exclusive games? The Xbox 360 had Halo, Gears of War, Fable, Forza, Crackdown. The PlayStation 3 had Uncharted, Resistance, Little Big Planet, Ratchet & Clank, Sly Cooper, Killzone, Infamous, God of War, Metal Gear Solid 4, Gran Turismo, Mod Nation Racers, Puppeteer, The Last of Us. Okay, this may be a bit unfair. To give Microsoft credit, they did quite a good job in the first half of the 360's life with exclusives. I mean, Halo 3 launching will always be one of the biggest events in gaming history. Even looking at the best PlayStation 3 exclusives, they just don't hold a candle to the amount of excitement around the world for that one game. Gears of War was huge, and Forza took over the racing sim crown from Gran Turismo. Like, my god, they had Forza games releasing every single year, and the Gran Turismo team was just like, here's a prequel to Gran Turismo 5, because for some reason we're taking 20 years to make it. And then for some reason they put out Gran Turismo 6 after the PlayStation 4 launched. With digital bite-sized titles, Xbox Live Arcade was far better. They had so many fun experiences on there. PSN? They secured games like BioShock and Mass Effect. Mass Effect 2 was exclusive for a year. Now, each of these games came to PS3 eventually, and timed exclusives aren't my idea for a fun afternoon, but it at least showed they meant business. They got Grand Theft Auto to jump away from being a timed PlayStation exclusive franchise. They got Final Fantasy to come to Xbox finally. They really cared, and then they gave up. Once Kinect rolled around, they let their guard down, and while Sony was already starting to kill it, they really went crazy funding exclusive content. Not only were they making amazing exclusive games, but sequels to those games, and not only were these games great, but they had a huge variety of games exclusive to PlayStation 3. There's a reason the only things people think about when Xbox is brought up are Halo, Gears of War, and Forza. Kinect exclusives could be sort of cute, but right when I said that, Sony put out The Last of Us. Jesus. One of the most critically acclaimed games of all time. That got so many people to buy a PS3. And then you had some of the more unknown games. Puppeteer is really charming. And not all PS3 exclusives were winners. Some of them definitely missed the mark, but many PS3 exclusives were truly experiences worth investing in a PS3 for. The PS3 may have been rough around the edges and difficult to use in many areas, but I don't even have to finish this sentence. So the PS3 won, which is weird considering that I used a 360 back in the day. To be fair, it could have gone either way, but based on my personal taste at the moment, I think the PS3 comes out on top. Even if it's an absolute bitch to use. But turns out I'm not blinded by nostalgia or love for a specific company. I picked the PS3 when the 360 was the console I owned, so that's a plus to my reviewing skills. The only thing the PS3 could use is a version of Mario Party 9. This game's actually terrible, but I love it because it's made by Nintendo.